Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people that I've connected with in the world of arts and entertainment over the years, and today I'm very pleased to have on the show music aficionado, executive, and consultant. Welcome to the show, Alexander Mair.
Thank you, Tommy.
So, I know you've been at this seemingly forever, and you got started with your love for music, buying records, but not just any records, 78s, when you were just a kid. So,
Yep.
I'm just curious now, you started out buying records, and then wasn't long after that you got a job working in a record store. Now, how old were you when you started working in a record store, and what was your fascination with records in the first place?
Well, I don't know why, because my family wasn't particularly musical, but I started listening to music on the radio, I guess when I was 8 or 9. This is before rock radio happened, before rock and roll or came along. It was Patti Page and Joe Stafford and Tennessee Ernie Ford and people like that. And I used to listen to a 1 hour a week radio show on a Hamilton radio station that played the top 10 of the week, probably the American top 10 from Billboard. I'm not sure their source. And music became very important to me. And I started buying records, 78s when I was 8 or 9. And I got hired at a record store after school when I was 12 because I was familiar with all the pop music and, people seemed to trust my opinions on what they should buy. This was the time when you went into a record store and you asked what's new, and you go into a booth and play the music to decide whether or not you wanted to buy it. And I got to know people's taste, and they trusted my judgment on what they should listen to and what they should buy. So, I was very lucky in that regard that music was such a big factor in my life at such an early age.
And people are still trusting your advice to this day. So now I understand that you weren't really that passionate about playing music yourself, although you did dabble in guitar, but it seems to me like you've been a lifelong fan of musicians and artists, and that's sort of how I'm going to assume that's how you got into the business?
Well, when I finished high school, I had wanted to go to Ryerson and take the radio and television arts course, but my marks weren't high enough. So my father got me a job at Massey Ferguson, the tractor company where he worked. And I realized early on that if I didn't have a degree, that my future was probably going to be limited. So I enrolled at University of Toronto at night school to become an accountant of all things. And as part of the commitment to becoming an accountant, you had to work in accounting during the day. So I went to my boss at Massey Ferguson and asked if I could transfer. He said, yes, when an opening comes up that you're suited for. But in the meantime, if you want to go looking elsewhere, feel free to take the time off. I didn't know if he liked me or didn't like me, but I took advantage of that offer. And I saw an ad in the paper for Capitol Records for an accountant. I applied, went for the interview, and because of my knowledge of the label and the artists, I got hired. And I had had 1 2 hour accounting lesson, debit and credit. That's the only accounting training I had. At Capitol, one of the executives thought they should have a program to promote from within, and they set up a course, and anyone on staff who wanted to apply could. And I applied, and because of my retail knowledge, I was head of the class, so to speak. So Capitol transferred me out of accounting into indoor sales and then to outdoor. They gave me the territory of Western Ontario. And that's when I really got into the music business and promotion. Salesmen were expected when they were in a town, for example, London, that they should go to the radio stations. Well, the reality is that there's no commission for a salesman calling on a radio station, and the salesman didn't understand broadcasting or how it worked. And I went into the radio stations and discovered that I preferred promotion to sales. So I wanted to move into the promotion field if possible. And I left Capitol and went to a company called McKay Distributors, which distributed London records. They wanted to fire the promotion man they had. His name was Walt Grealis, and they fired Walt, and I got hired. And Walt, at that time, started RPM magazine, which was a very major influence in the Canadian music industry, particularly in the creation of Canadian content. I went from London Records. I moved over to the Compo Company, which today is called Universal Music, and promoted. I worked there for 5 years, promoting artists from Frank Sinatra, Jimi Hendrix, Brenda Lee, Burl Ives, a number of artists. One of whom was Gordon Lightfoot, who, when I met him, he was working at a bar on Yonge Street for $210 a week and take-home food. And I worked with him for 5 albums. All the albums sold over 100,000 in Canada. And in the 4th year of working with him, he sold out Massey Hall for the first time. And he asked me to manage him. So I left Compo to manage Gordon Lightfoot, which I did for 8 years, 1968 to 76. During that period, I thought a lot what I wanted to do, and I wanted to have my own record company. So I planned and developed a business plan for Attic Records with a partner, Tom Williams. And we launched Attic Records in 1974. I continued to manage Gordon Lightfoot until 76, at which time I could go full-time with the record company.
Right. Now,
And
I know that you were a big part of Gordon Lightfoot's success. I'm curious now, he was working in a bar.
yeah, Steele's Tavern.
Okay. Now, did he really have the desire to get into the music business, or did you do any coaxing there? I'm curious because,
Oh no, he was full-time musician
okay.
and songwriter. He had studied at Westlake College in Los Angeles. He had made a number of records for independent Canadian labels, had a bit of chart success in Canada, had moved to England for a while and been a regular on a television show in England and a regular on a television show here in Canada as a dancer and singer.
Okay.
He wasn't a very good dancer, but at the point that I met him, his songwriting was just starting to happen. Peter, Paul, and Mary had covered For Loving Me and I think Early Morning Rain at that point. So he was making his mark as a songwriter. He had moved from Steele's Tavern on Yonge Street to the Riverboat in Yorkville. And the last time he played the Riverboat, he played there for a whole month and then moved to Massey Hall. He has performed more than any other artist at Massey Hall, except for the Toronto Symphony. He had done as many as 6 nights in a row at Massey Hall. He's at the point now that when Massey Hall reopens, he'll probably do 3 nights still.
Wow. And he's getting up there. But
he's 82.
Yeah. Now I know that he was also a huge advocate for other artists to write their own material. I spoke to Bruce Good a while ago, and he said that Gordon was a huge influence on them to continue writing their own material. But I interrupted you as you were about to tell us the story of Attic Records.
Canadian content regulations came in 1971, and I had advocated for them. And at that point, I was a director of CAPAC, which became SOCAN when it merged with BMI Canada. I looked at the competition, and there was a few labels already existing: True North, Anthem, Axe, Aquarius, but none of them had funding. They were all started on a shoestring, and I thought there was a real opportunity for a company that had sufficient funds to make nothing but world quality records and be successful. And I had broken the unicorn by the Irish Rovers, which started here in Toronto and ended up top 10 in the US. And the Rovers management had always said if I wanted to do anything of my own, they wanted to be involved. So when I started thinking of Attic, creating Attic, I knew we'd have to raise money. So Tom, my partner for the first 10 years, he sold a house that he owned here in Toronto that he was renting out. I took a mortgage on my house. The Irish Rovers invested money and put together a consortium. And through contacts, we connected with the venture capital company, and they put money in. So we were the first company, independent Canadian company, with funding. So we started making records. Our first records were by Shirley Eichard, Flood, Ken Tobias, Ron Negrini, Haygood Hardy, Triumph. And over the years, we worked with a substantial number of other Canadian artists, Teenage Head, Haywire, Lee Aaron. We also started licensing product from the United States or international. And at various times, we represented Weird Al Yankovic, his whole catalog, Creed, Jennifer Warnes, Katrina and the Waves, Motorhead.
There's so many.
I'm trying to think. There's so many. We had released hundreds of albums over 27 years.
As I observe your social media, it seems like you know everybody in the business.
Pretty well, yeah. I just got word today that Tommy Boy, a label we used to work with, has just been sold for $100 million, which is unbelievable. But Tommy is Tommy Silverman, and he deserves it. But $100 million for a catalog that has basically been dormant for a number of years is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, the music business today is so different from anything that we dealt with years ago. And I know that a lot of the major artists have been selling their publishing recently. I guess that's a good thing, because I've heard people like David Crosby basically tell everybody that they're running out of money. They don't get anything from sales anymore, and terrestrial radio doesn't really pay anything anymore, and streaming is a joke. So I know that you've been advising people as to what to do with their publishing and so on, and you're still consulting to this day. What are your thoughts on the current state of the music business?
It's very fragmented. Right now, with streaming, the artists and the labels make money. The songwriters and publishers are currently getting a bad deal, but I've got to have faith that that will change. YouTube is poised to pass Spotify in the amount of royalties it's paying out, which to me is a positive trend. Streaming is difficult to break an artist unless you're the kind of artist that attracts a very rabid following. And that's usually the younger artists, the hip hop artists. Half of all streaming is what we call a back catalog. So artists like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and others are still doing quite well off streaming. But the average newcomer, the chance of breaking through on streaming is very, very difficult. Right now, TikTok has become the main breakout website or streaming service, but the TikTok users tend to be young people, teenagers, early 20s at the oldest. It's not a medium that's caught on with an older audience, which means if you're making music for an older audience, your chance of getting anywhere in TikTok is minimal.
Right.
Spotify adds about 40,000 tracks a day. So, if you're an artist who makes their own record and puts it up on Spotify, outside of your friends and social media, your chance of people discovering you is really, really, really low.
Yeah, you kind of need a machine behind you, I know. And I've heard stories about streaming farms too, where some of the big artists their management has an office set up with devices streaming all day until they get to a certain point, and then they ended up getting sponsors from that.
Yep.
So it's really interesting. And I know that in the old days, I don't know if it was easier to break, but the language was possibly easier to understand. And for a lot of us that have been playing music for decades, I don't really have any interest in making millions of dollars from my music at this point. I just play and sing and write now for the love of the music. And I think that too many people are just hell bent on making $1 million overnight, when as you say, the chances for a new artist to break are very, very slim. And if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?
Yep.
So I know you've won a lot of awards, and you were inducted into the Canadian Industry Hall of Fame, Canadian Music Industry Hall of Fame in 2014. You put in the work and you reap the rewards from that. So have you been pretty satisfied with everything you've accomplished over the years?
But first, this very important public service announcement. Hey, I got my first dose of the vaccine, and I really think that if we want to get summer back, get our festivals and our live music back, we need to get our first dose. If enough of us do this, we can have our freedom back. Yes, do this. And I know a lot of my famous friends agree with me.
Hi, this is Keith Hampshire, the big time operator. Just reminding you to go and get your vaccine. I just had mine. Didn't hurt a bit. I'm a big, brave boy. You should go and get yours, too. And the sooner we get it all sorted away, we can get back to having live music again. Wouldn't that be great? I miss it so. Anyway, go get your shot.
Thanks, Keith Hampshire. Now back to the show, where Alexander was just about to answer the question that I asked if he was satisfied with everything he'd accomplished over the years.
Good question. I'm reasonably satisfied. When we started Addict, we expected that we would become an international company with our own offices in the US and the UK. That was part of the long-term thinking. We did open an office in the UK for a while, but it was a cash drain, so we closed that. We were very successful licensing our artists to international companies and, selling. Triumph, we had a number of gold and platinum records internationally with the Nylons. We did over 1 million albums in the US, and we were gold in Japan and gold in Holland. They had a successful international career. Unfortunately, the two key members both died, but we didn't have that one giant, which I would have liked to have had. We got close to opening in the US at one point. I had a couple of investors willing to put up substantial money, but it was contingent on being able to get a certain person to head up the American company. And unfortunately, he had just signed a long-term contract, and we went to his employer, which was a multinational record label, and his employers refused to let him out of his contract. So when he couldn't get out of his contract, the funding wasn't there. Whether or not, in hindsight, we would have been successful, I'm not sure, because this would have been the time around the turn of the century when Napster had launched, giving music away free, even though it was illegal. When I saw Napster, I was immediately convinced that digital distribution was the future of the music industry, and I proved to be right. It happened a lot faster than I expected. Apple started with iTunes downloading a track for 99 cents, but as we know now, most users of music get it from YouTube, from Spotify, from TikTok. The physical product died almost overnight, and all the record companies and artists suffered at the beginning of the century.
I know that a lot of people in the record business lost their shirts, but I've been hearing one word from you that's been consistent is investors. So for years, I've been told never invest your own money. So obviously you did something right.
I sold my company to a public company, a new public company run by Alan Gregg, who had been the manager of the Tragically Hip. And unfortunately, in the first 6 months we were in business, 3 major retailers, including Sam the Record Man, went bankrupt. And that basically did in the public company. They limped along for a total of 18 months and then went bankrupt.
Talk about timing. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy, oh boy. So what's happening with you today? I understand you're still consulting.
Yeah, I've done a variety of things since I sold my company and retired from full-time work. One of the big dance acts, one of the biggest in the world, I helped straighten out some contractual problems he had. An investor who wanted to invest substantial money, 7 figures, into a record label, I helped him find the right label to invest in. This week, I was dealing with a publisher where the person running it has decided it's time to retire. And she called me. We're longtime friends, and she has a major writer that she represents. And we discussed what she should do. She wants to step down. There's a number of considerations. Should she sell the company? Should she find a third-party administrator? And she's talked to the writers involved because the key writer has got two families, an older family from his first wedding and a younger family from his second. And, is this the time for him to consider allowing his catalog to be sold because of the high multiples that are now being paid for publishing rights? It's time for tax planning to take care of his children and his grandchildren from his first marriage. There were a whole bunch of considerations we had to look at, and we did. The week before, I was working with an American publisher, not a dissimilar situation. He owns one major song and has a small catalog that's valuable. And he's in his 60s now, and he had a similar idea. What should he do? He didn't want to continue to do the paperwork. Should he find a third-party administrator? Should he consider selling? The writer of his major copyright is deceased, so he doesn't have that worry about the writer. But there's a lot of things for him to consider, and he's an American living in Canada, so he's liable for American taxation. So he has to take that into consideration if he sells the company. And the question if he wants an administrator, what percentage is appropriate, what advance is appropriate, the pros and cons of lower commission versus a higher advance. Nothing is as simple as it may appear to be, put it that way.
Well, I know recently you posted something on Facebook about a band and you said you wondered why they never were very successful. My immediate comment was, I think they needed somebody like you in their corner. And it's very interesting to me that there are very few successful musicians who were able to administer all the business on their own and that actually had the business acumen to know what to do. And it's guys like you that have made life easier for so many.
Yeah, well, over the years, besides running my record company, I was also vice president and treasurer of SOCAN. I was president of Canadian Independent Record Production Association, Canadian Music Publishers Association, a director of Factor, a director of Radio Star Maker. So I've had all those experiences, which I bring to bear when I'm working with a client.
Right. Yeah. And you've certainly helped a lot of people. I don't think I have any more questions for you, Alexander, but what I like to do is to give my guests the last word. So if there's anything that you particularly feel passionate about, why don't you tell us what that is?
Well, there's a trend started, which I fully support, and that is for the artist to own their masters. It's dealing with the major record labels. It's very, very difficult, particularly if you need them more than they need you. The major labels insist on owning the masters. And the reality is that the artists pay for them. They pay for the production and they get a royalty, but even once they pay back the production costs, they don't get the ownership back. But there is, with the independent sector, it's becoming easier to get your masters back. And there's a few major artists who've been able, through negotiation and at time of contractual renewal, to be able to get ownership of their masters back. And I think that's a good trend. But having said so, somebody has to know how to manage everything. And you're quite right, Tommy, that there's not a lot of people available who can do that, who have the experience from management, from record company experience, from understanding financial statements, understanding cash flow. I think there's going to be a developing industry of managing rights on behalf of the artists. One who comes to mind here in Toronto, Daniel Caesar, is an independent artist and won a Grammy. I don't know who's managing his rights, but hopefully whoever it is doing it properly. Something else totally different. which I'm pleased with, is the number of Canadian artists who left the country for career purposes, usually moving to the States, who are moving back to Canada. Burton Cummings from the Guess Who moved back a year or two ago to Moose Jaw, of all places. Neil Young is back living up near Stony Lake here in Ontario. Joni Mitchell is living in British Columbia. Katie Lang has moved back to Calgary. Anne Murray is living in Halifax. I think these are all very positive for the Canadian industry, that we don't lose our artists and the financial impact those artists have when they leave the country. All the money flows to wherever they move to. And, you know, Lightfoot was the first major Canadian artist to not move to the States. And we now have Drake living here, and Bublé living here, and Diana Krall still living here, and others. And I think that's really a positive sign.
I agree. Well, you know, Alexander, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me here. And until next time, cheers.
Take care, Tommy.
Well, Alexander Mair certainly knows the business side of the music business. Boy, I'll tell you, I haven't always made the right business decisions in the music business myself, but one thing, I do own my own masters, and any new artist starting out should retain ownership of your masters as well if you can. And boy, wouldn't it be great to have the mailing addresses of people like Burton Cummings, Neil Young, Katie Lang, Anne Marie, etc.? Anyway, that was great fun. Alexander Mair, as you know, is a music business executive and is not a musician. So in lieu of playing a song from him, which he does not have, here is the title track from my album, Only Human. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including producing, editing, guest acquisition, etc. All rights reserved. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends was written and recorded by Tommy Solo with a little help from my friends in the night crew. And hey, if you like the show, why not subscribe? Until next time, cheers.